This time it's 5 more of history's most important motorcycles. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. This time we're looking at 5 motorcycles that pioneered advances that we take for granted on modern motorcycles today, but at the time were absolutely groundbreaking. Triumph Ricky. Harry Ricardo, or later Sir Harry Ricardo, was an engineer whose specialty was gas flow and cylinder head design, who worked on tank and other military engines during the war, and post-war set up a consultancy firm which did work for a number of different companies. He was approached by Triumph Engineering because they wanted something to replace their side valve engines. After coming up with a number of prototypes, he landed on the idea of using a 4-valve cylinder head for improved cooling and of course gas flow. This was the first mass production motorcycle to use 4-valve cylinder heads, just edging Rudge out in the British market. 4-valve heads weren't exactly new, of course. They'd been used in racing, particularly in cars, for many years before that. Production of the Type R began in 1921, and it did take part in the TT, but wasn't actually that successful. Highs finished in a lowly 13th place, with Ricardo's assistant Frank Halford on board. Halford himself would get a bronze cylinder head version and lap Brooklands at 68 miles an hour, and broke the Brooklands hour lap record at 76.74 miles per hour. Production of the 500cc 20 horsepower Flyer would end in 1928. BMW's R12 and R17. BMW's R12 and R17 models were produced between 1935 and 1942. Essentially, the R12 is the cooking model and the R17 is their overhead valve, more sporty machine. The lineage of these machines started with the R7 concept of 1933. This had been designed by Alfred Browning with an Art Deco sort of geometric feel to it. In truth, the production R17 and R12 models did look rather more conventional, but they did feature some rather innovative designs. Principal amongst these was the first use of hydraulically damped telescopic front forks. Now, front forks had been seen before. Scott had used them many years before, in fact, on his Squirrel 2-strokes, but the BMW design was the first to actually make use of hydraulic damping, pretty much the same as most modern motorcycles today. The Scott, of course, had used friction damping, which was much more crude. The more simple R12, with its side valve engine, saw extensive use by the German military during World War II, and by 1942 some 36,000 examples had been produced. The R12's boxer engine made around 18 horsepower, which gave it a top speed of somewhere around 70 to 75 miles an hour, depending on conditions. Transmission used a car-type dry clutch and a hand-shift 4-speed gearbox. Naturally enough, the R17 was mechanically very similar, although its overhead valve engine made some 33 horsepower, to a considerable improvement on top speed. However, the needs of the military for a side valve machine meant that only 434 of the overhead valve engines were ever actually produced, making the R17 one of the most desirable classic BMWs. Production of the R12 would end in 1942, and it was superseded by the R75, a machine specifically designed to meet the military requirements. The Velitec KTT. Like so many pioneers in the British industry, the Gutmann family were German immigrants, changing their name to Goodman to make them sound more English later on. They established their first manufacturing company in 1896, and by the turn of the century were producing a range of bicycles and bicycle components. In 1904 they took over the Calicom Motor Company. This had produced a single-cylinder motorcycle called the Ormonde. They would soon start producing their own machines. Initially they were very well known for production of small capacity single-cylinder 2-strokes. The company adopted the name Velos Motorcycles, but one of their most popular early small capacity bikes had been called the Velitec, and the name stuck and became popular and became used across the range. The popularity of these early 2-strokes gave the company enough financial clout to develop its own all-new overhead cam engine in the mid-20s, and this model would be the KTT. They tried the new overhead cam 350 at the TT in 1925, but with little success. But in 1926 they returned with an improved model and won the TT by an amazing 10 minutes. These and other successes weren't simply because the bike had excellent performance, but also because the little Velitec was the first machine to use a foot change sequential gearbox. This meant that each and every gear change was a few seconds quicker than it would be on a hand change machine, and over the course of a large race like the TT, that made a massive difference. As is usual in racing, this advantage was fairly short-lived because all the other companies very quickly copied the design. And of course, all manual transmission motorcycles on the road today owe their gearbox design to the Velitec KTT. KTT would go on and win multiple TTs and other race events, but its place in history was very much secured not by its engine, but by its clever gearbox. As an aside, I have ridden one of these machines and have to say the engine and gearbox combination is absolutely fantastic. Kawasaki Z1000H. Well, depending where you're from, this is the Z1000, the Z1000 or the KZ1000. The Z1000 was introduced in 1976 to replace the earlier Z900 and Z1 models. It offered obviously a little bit more capacity, so a bit more horsepower and a bit more torque, as if it was needed. There were also of course chassis upgrades and better brakes. But make no mistake, this was very much a 70s muscle bike, so that chassis was always hanging on for dear life to that powerful engine. The engine made around 83 horsepower to 90 horsepower in later models. Top speed was around 132 miles an hour, again depending on the model and specification. The H model arrived in 1980 and was very much in keeping with the period, and it was increasingly large, a wet weight around 563 pounds, and had all-round disc brakes, and of course increased power. But what really makes this bike a groundbreaking machine is the fact that it was the very first machine to feature fuel injection. Although generally described as the first mass-produced fuel injection motorcycle, in reality only 1,000 of the machines were actually manufactured. This is because it was really designed as a rolling testbed for the GP-Z1100, which would follow in 1981, which was going to feature fuel injection from the very start. Short production run, test bed machine, whatever it may be, the Z1000H was the first fuel injection production bike ever released on the market, and has thus cemented its place in history. PNM Panther. Joe S.C. Phelan was an engineer from the north of England, specifically Yorkshire. By 1900 he was in partnership with one Harry Rayner, based at Cleckheaton in Yorkshire. Phelan believed right from the beginning that the engine and chassis of a machine should be integrated and part of a whole, and not just some tubular chassis with an engine stuffed into it. He conceived of an idea where the head, barrel and crankcase would essentially replace the down tube of the frame. What he designed was the first engine which was used as a stress member of the chassis. At a stroke he simplified the construction, lightened the weight and made the whole thing more rigid. Initially he lacked funds to mass produce the machine himself, so it was built by the Humber Company, who despite the name were actually based in Coventry, Harry Humber being the owner of the company, hence the company's name. And it was the Humber Company who built the first of these machines under licence. Unfortunately in 1903, Phelan's partner Rayner was killed in an accident, but he was approached by one Richard Moore who offered to invest in the company. The company was now renamed Phelan and Moore, later simplified to PNM. And in the early 20s, the Humber licence to build the machines was allowed to lapse, leaving PNM alone to produce the machines themselves. PNM was of course never a large, well-financed company, but they steadily developed the machine over the years, peaking in the 1930s with the M series, after which development of the engines really did begin to stagnate. The machines would rumble on post-war, culminating in the M120 650cc single, which today is probably best known as a sidecar tug. While production of the big Panthers would finally come to a close in 1967, the influence of the design would carry on. The ingenious stress member chassis concept would go on to be employed on such machines as the Honda CBX, the Laverda Jota, and of course the early Hinckley Triumphs. Well, I hope you enjoyed our list of 5 influential motorcycles. What machines do you think are the most influential in motorcycling history? Please message below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.